Lumbar Locker. Don't be distracted by her beauty. She's a lumbar locker. She's known around the world for it. So why is lumbar locking bad? Why do we do it? A lot of times, just like with a high plank, if I'm trying to not use my tricep, if I'm trying to make it easier for myself, I'm going to lock the joint out. And I'm going to rely on the joint to keep me up. Not good for the joint. Why do we do that with the low back? A lot of times with weakness of your core, you will lock out your lumbar spine to engage or make contact with those facet joints so the core doesn't have to work as hard. So what are we looking for? In this side position, we will see an accentuated curve. Fancy talk, lumbar lordosis. Also look for what's called that anterior pelvic tilt. These all go together. Look at my waistline. If the waistline is even, not hiked up too high or too low, if that is going forward, that is the anterior pelvic tilt. That's excessive. That's locking out the low back. Another way I've used in the past is with this bowl of water. Think of that, your pelvis ring at the top, like a bowl of water. If that water is spilling out of the front, I'm locking out my lumbar spine, going out forward. So those are signs to identify to see, are you in fact a lumbar locker? Okay, so let's go and get into, we already talked about what locking out your low back can do. It can cause low back pain, whereas forward leaners are more disc-oriented pathology or injury, versus extenders or lockers are more facet joint pathology or overuse loading. So I'm going to describe a couple other things that can happen as a result of locking out your low back. First, we have overstriding. Overstriding, by definition, is landing too far out in front of your center of mass, in front of your body. If I'm locking out my lumbar spine and leaning back, that shifts my center of mass backwards, it's going to be easier for me to overstride. I'm leaning back. It's hard to land underneath my center of mass when I'm leaning backwards. If you can do it, I want to see a video of it. You'll be featured. Just kidding, don't do it. It's not good for you. So let's connect the dots real quick. Overstriding tends to be with a more locked out or straight knee. We've already talked about the detriments of locking out your spine or your joints. That force, when you land, up to 2.5 times your body weight is going to go up. When your knee is relatively locked out like that, it goes up to your spine. So we're talking about insult to injury. Lumbar spine locking out coupled with overstriding is a recipe for low back pain. So decreased hip extension, why is this? If I lock out my lumbar spine and try to extend my hip, try it, see what happens. You're not going to be able to go out as far. What happens with this is it's not as much of an injury thing as it is a performance based. It can cause you to have a decreased stride towards the back side of the gait cycle. Overstriding slows you down. As we get faster, we start to increase that stride length behind us. If you don't have enough hip extension, you're going to lose out on that. So this is the first time in the series that we're going to identify a fault from the back view. I always sync it up and include both. This is where we find frontal plane abnormalities or transverse plane, versus here is more sagittal. So we tend to look more at this. This is very important as well. Most of the common running faults, overstriding, too much excessive vertical displacement, are mainly seen from the side position, but we have to look at the back view as well. What do we see? So whereas locking out the lumbar spine caused decrease in hip extension, which is performance-based, this can cause pathology. If you lock out your lumbar spine, you're going to have to get that movement from somewhere. You're trying to move forward. If you're not getting it from your low back, you're going to get it from above and below. So a lot of times we'll see excessive thoracic rotation as a result. What that can do is cause shearing stress towards your spine. So it's not always that rotation is pathological. One, it's wasted time and energy going side to side when you're trying to go forward, but this can kind of accentuate a lumbar spine or a low back pain. So how do we fix it? We have to find neutral spine. We're not forward leaning, we're not backwards leaning, we're finding the exact middle ground, that happy position. We're taking the spine through both range, the excursions of range of motion, and finding that middle spot. Posterior pelvic tilt, anterior. Take a little bit off, finding that middle ground, then activating your core, see previous post, in that neutral spine position. So here's the progression. Here's what you're going to do. Now that you've got neutral spine, now that you're activating your core, we're going to take an elastic band, you're going to put it over the door. You're going to wear it like a book bag. From here, I want to make sure I find that neutral spine, activate the core, and I'm leaning forward, just like with running, making sure I'm not pooching the butt out. See previous post about the forward leaner. I'm now folding at the ankles, leaning forward, keeping my core engaged, spine in neutral. And that band is going to give you some resistance to force your core to be on. We're going to mimic that point of running. You're going to see I'm going to go forward, soft, quiet landing here in the front, using the band to help engage my core. Some people, that can be their last step. They can mimic that feeling when they go out and run. So this is what I will do in the clinic. Same setup. I will put the band across the shoulders, make it like a harness. Make sure it doesn't slide up and down. I have them run, and I tell them, resistance on, so they know I'm pulling, and they feel it, they lean into it. All right, Mr. Jones, Mrs. Jones, I want you to get that feeling. What does that feel like? I'm going to take some slack off, and I want you to maintain that forward posturing, leading with your core. Okay, so as they go, you feel it, good, on, off, on, off. I'm using that resistance, that pulling, to train them to lead into it with their core being engaged in that neutral spine to prevent that lumbar locking. So you can do this on yourself. It's not as easy grabbing a partner, but here's what it looks like. So you'll see it's forcing me to lean into it, engaging my core. That concludes number 3 of lumbar locking. Next up, it's going to be something that we see from the backside view. Again, look for a quiz. I'm trying to make this more interactive as possible. Hope this helped. Let me know if you have